what we've learned so far is that to get a game going with the enchant.js framework, we need to tell our window that when it loads, it should execute the mygame function. We need to call the enchant function in order to initialize the enchant.js environment, and then inside the game function that you associate with onload, we need to actually define what our game is going to do. Inside that definition, inside the definition of our game function, we want to start a new game instance, set the frame rate, and then preload any assets that we're planning to use in the game. In this case, we're going to use an image of a circle, which happens to be that one, called circle.png here on code 9 leap. You can also see your assets down here, so that refers to that asset. And we preloaded it there. The bulk of the logic is going to be defined here on the game onload function. So we're going to create a function there that basically says what we want to have happen. What we want to have happen when the game runs. In this case, what we want to do is create a new sprite, 48 by 48, which happens to be how big that sprite is, that image is, pardon me. And we're going to call that sprite circle. And to that circle, we're going to give it an image of our circle.png file, which we can access through the game.assets associative array. To be cool, we're going to set our background color of our game, of our root scene, to black. And we have to add our circle to the game's root scene using the add child method. That'll actually get our circle rendered when we add it to the scene. To have it do anything, we have to add some extra code. And what I'm doing in this example is to our circle, which is our sprite here, I'm adding an event listener so that every frame the circle is going to ask this question. Every frame we're going to execute this function. In this function, we're going to ask if our circle's x-coordinate is less than the game's width minus the circle's width. We are going to set the circle's x-coordinate to a value 4 greater than what it currently is. In other words, what this says is if we have not yet reached the end of the canvas, move the circle over 4 pixels. And indeed, that expectation is borne out. So that's where we were last time. What I would like to do next is build on this and try to get this the circle to bounce off an edge. And I think we can pretty much kind of casually understand what we need to have happen. This thing is moving in this direction. It's moving because 4 is being added to the x-coordinate every frame until it hits the edge. What we want it to do is when it hits the edge, we actually want that value of x-coordinate to start going down. So our first take at solving this might look something like, if we have not yet reached the edge, add 4 to the x-coordinate. If we have reached the edge, then subtract 4 from the value. Is that going to work? No, it's not working. And you can see fact that it's jittering kind of maybe suggests that there's something wrong, and actually what's happening is the logic right here. The first time we get beyond the edge, the circle moves over 4 pixels. When it's over 4 pixels to the left and we come in here again, well, we're now into this mode again. So basically what's going on here is every other frame it's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So we need to add a little bit more logic to get this to work as expected. What I'm going to do to solve this particular problem is add a variable called moving right, and this is going to be a Boolean, and I'm going to set to true. And what this variable is going to do is it's going to be a variable to store the direction the circle is moving. Then down here, I'm going to say if the circle is currently moving right, then I want to start asking some questions. In fact, to simplify this, I'm just going to get rid of what we have before. Although we're going to actually reuse this code, what I want to do is start over. So if we're moving right, if we're currently moving right, I want to ask if our circle's x-coordinate is less than the game's width minus the circle width. Yep, that's the same test that we had before. So if we have not yet reached the edge, then to our circle's x-coordinate, I want to add 4 pixels. I want to make it move over 4. So if I'm currently moving right and I have not yet reached the edge, then I want to move over 1 more. If I am currently moving right and I have hit the edge, well, then I'm no longer moving right. I need to move left. So I'm going to say this is false. And then I'll start moving left. So what do we have so far? We're going to start out moving right, which is why I'm true. Then every frame I'm asking a question. If I am moving right, then I need to ask again I have to ask another question, and that is, have I reached the edge yet? So if I'm moving right and I have not reached the edge yet, then move right some more. On the other hand, if I'm moving right and I have reached the edge, so I enter the else clause, then I'm going to say, hey, you know what, I'm moving left now, or I'm setting moving right to false. And then I will actually set my x variable of my x parameter of my circle to something 4 less than it was before. Alright, that seems not too unreasonable. What does that give us? Are we done yet? No, we actually have an error here. That's because I think I've got an extra bracket. There we go. Okay. Now, that ought to do something anyway, other than give us an error. So let's see what this gives us. Okay, we're moving right, moving right, moving right, get to the edge. Oh, what happened? Well, we moved right until we got to the edge. When we got to the edge, we said we're no longer moving right, and we moved 4 pixels to the left. You can see we moved 4 pixels to the left here. Next frame, however, since we set moving right false here, next frame when we entered here, moving right was false, so we didn't do anything. Alright, so what that means is if I'm actually moving left, I need to continue to move left. And that ought to work now. If I'm moving right and I have not reached the edge yet, then move right some more. If I'm moving right and I have reached the edge, then we got to change our state and say we're no longer moving right and nudge ourselves over to the left one. If I'm not moving right, then I'm moving left. Let's see what that gives us. Move to the right, hit the edge, up, move to the left, and yes, off the screen. And there it is, going off to California. Next video will show us how to bounce in the other direction.